The cold air of the council chamber cut the skin like invisible blades. Ethan felt every drop of sweat trickle down his neck, every beat of his heart echoing in his ears like war drums. The flickering flames of the torches danced on the stone walls, creating shifting shadows that seemed to mock his vulnerable position in the center of the hall. "Sir Ethan," Lord Brandon's voice cut through the silence like a whip. "Do you deny that your loyalty to the princess transcends the proper bounds of a sworn knight?" His blood ran cold. There it was, the trap, finally sprung. Every pair of eyes in the room pierced him like spear points. The king watched from his elevated throne, his fingers drumming on the arm of the golden chair. The councillors whispered among themselves, their grey beards bobbing in silent approval of Brandon's words. But it was Olivia's gaze that destroyed him. Seated beside the throne, wrapped in blue silks that highlighted the paleness of her face, she stared at him with a mixture of desperation and pleading that he had known since childhood. The same look she'd had when she'd hurt herself in the woods and he'd run to her side. "Answer," Brandon insisted, taking a step forward. The torchlight illuminated his predatory smile. "The court awaits your answer." Ethan clenched his fists. The truth burned in his throat like a hot iron. He could lie, bow his head, accept the humiliation and keep his position, or he could speak the truth and lose everything. The silence stretched like a rope about to snap. Every second felt like an eternity. He felt the weight of his sword at his side, the cold steel he had sworn to use to protect the kingdom. But what kind of kingdom forced him to choose between honor and love? He began, his voice coming out hoarser than he intended. Olivia closed her eyes. He saw a single tear trace a path down her cheek, glistening in the golden torchlight. In that moment, years of memories flooded him like an avalanche. The laughter shared among the trees, her hands smudged with dirt, the first glance they exchanged when they were no longer children. Brandon's smile widened, sensing victory was near. The fate of 3 lives balanced on the tip of a single word. 3 weeks before the confrontation in the council, Ethan rode along the dusty roads leading to the castle, the morning sun warming his polished iron armor. The familiar weight of steel against his chest was a comfort, a reminder of who he had become. Sir Ethan Blackwood, sworn knight of the crown, protector of the weak, and servant of justice. But it was hard to feel like a true knight when his duty for the day was to escort a caravan of prosperous merchants through peaceful lands. There was no glory in it, only the routine fulfillment of his duty. He sighed, adjusting the reins as he watched the road ahead. That's when he saw her. Olivia was walking alone on a path that cut through the adjacent woods, wrapped in a simple brown linen cloak that attempted to disguise her royal identity. But Ethan would have recognized her anywhere. In the curve of her shoulders, the determined way she walked, the way her golden hair escaped from her hood, his heart leaped. It had been months since they had been alone, only exchanging fleeting glances during official ceremonies or formal greetings in the castle corridors. The distance between them had grown into an impassable chasm, carved out by the differences in social standing that adulthood had made impossible to ignore. He steered his mount away from the caravan, muttering an excuse to the guards about checking the security of the surrounding area. A few yards ahead he dismounted and tied his horse to a tree before slipping onto the forest path. "Your Highness," he called softly as he approached. She turned, and for a moment, time seemed to rewind 15 years. The same shy smile lit up her face. The same green eyes sparkled with a light he had stored in his memory like a treasure. "Ethan," her voice was almost a whisper, "you shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," he countered, moving closer. "It's dangerous to wander alone, even in these lands." Olivia lowered her hood, releasing the golden curls that shone in the light filtering through the leaves. "Dangerous for whom? I am the king's daughter." "That's precisely why." Ethan stopped a few feet from her, maintaining the distance protocol demanded, even here in their secret childhood refuge. "Lord Brandon would be furious if he knew you left without an escort." The mention of Brandon's name made her face tighten, as if she had tasted something bitter. "Lord Brandon is not my master. Not yet." The "yet" echoed between them like a sentence. Ethan felt a knot form in his chest. The engagement had been officially announced the month before, sealing Olivia's fate with the coldness of a business contract. "How do you feel about the marriage?" he asked, hating himself for being unable to hide the pain in his own voice. Olivia looked away, her gaze fixed on the gnarled roots of an ancient oak. "How should I feel? It is my duty to the kingdom." "That doesn't answer my question." She faced him again, and this time he saw all the anguish she tried to hide behind the mask of noble resignation. You know how I feel, Ethan. You've always known. His words died in his throat. They were treading on forbidden ground, speaking of feelings that could not exist, admitting truths that could destroy them both. Olivia, he started, taking a step forward. Don't. She held up a hand, stopping him. We can't. Not here. Not now. Maybe never again. Then why did you leave? Why did you come to the woods? She hesitated, biting her lower lip, a gesture he remembered from childhood when she was about to confess some mischief. Because I wanted to remember what it was like before, when we were just Ethan and Olivia, not a knight and a princess. Tears welled in her eyes. I wanted to remember when the world still made sense. The pain in her voice was like a dagger. Ethan fought the urge to take her in his arms, to promise that they would find a way, that love could overcome the social barriers that separated them. But he knew the reality. He had learned his lessons about social place and hierarchy the hard way. We should go back, he said finally, his voice rough. You'll be missed. I know. Olivia quickly wiped her eyes, recomposing her mask of the obedient princess. You go first. I'll wait a few minutes before I leave. Ethan nodded but didn't move. There was so much to say, so much that needed to be said before it was too late. But the words refused to form coherent sentences. Ethan, she called softly as he finally turned to leave. Yes, thank you. For finding me. For still being you. He didn't trust his own voice to reply. He just gave a single nod and walked away, feeling the weight of her gaze on his back until he disappeared among the trees. When he returned to the caravan, the merchants had barely noticed his absence, but something inside him had shifted. The brief encounter had rekindled a flame he had tried to bury under years of discipline and duty. Now, as he rode back to the castle, a single question hammered in his mind. How much longer could he pretend he could live without her? The answer would come sooner than he imagined. That very afternoon, a messenger arrived at the castle with news that would change everything. Trouble on the borders, threats to the trade routes, and a mission that seemed tailor-made to send Ethan far away from everything that truly mattered to him. Lord Brandon was smiling when the orders were read aloud in the Great Hall. A smile Ethan knew well, the smile of a predator who had just spotted its cornered prey. The castle's Great Hall buzzed with the typical commotion of an emergency council meeting. Nobles whispered among themselves, servants scurried about with scrolls, and the heavy air carried the scent of melted wax and collective anxiety. Ethan stood beside the other knights, watching Lord Brandon command everyone's attention as if he already owned the place. Tall and imposing, with dark hair combed back and a neatly trimmed beard, Brandon possessed the calculated good looks of men born to power. His clothes were of the finest fabric, his jewelry discreet but valuable, and his every gesture radiated the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. Your Majesty, Brandon addressed the king with the precise deference of one who knew the rules of the political game perfectly. The news from the borders is more serious than initially reported. King Edwin, a middle-aged man whose graying hair and deep wrinkles betrayed the weight of the crown, gestured for Brandon to continue. At his side, Olivia watched everything with a carefully neutral expression, but Ethan knew her face well enough to see the tension in the muscles of her neck. Merchants report organized attacks on the caravans, Brandon went on, unrolling a map on the central table. These are not common bandits. There is coordination, strategy. Someone is deliberately disrupting our trade routes. Worried murmurs rose throughout the hall. Trade was the kingdom's lifeblood, and any threat to it meant trouble for everyone. What measures do you propose? The king asked. Brandon smiled, and Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. There was something predatory in that smile, something that reminded him of a cat playing with a mouse before the final blow. I need a capable knight to lead a reconnaissance patrol, someone brave enough to venture into hostile territory and clever enough to return with valuable intelligence. Brandon's eyes deliberately swept the hall before landing on Ethan. Sir Ethan would be perfect for the mission. Ethan felt his blood run cold. This wasn't a recognition of his skills. It was a disguised exile, an elegant way to remove him from the castle just when Brandon needed to consolidate his influence over Olivia. An excellent choice, the king agreed, studying Ethan with approval. Sir Ethan has proven his worth time and again. When would you leave? At dawn tomorrow, Brandon answered before Ethan could speak. Time is of the essence. Every day of delay means more losses for our merchants. Ethan finally found his voice. Your Majesty, with all due respect, perhaps it would be wiser to send a larger contingent or— No, Brandon interrupted him softly, but firmly. Large groups attract attention. This mission requires discretion, 5 or 6 men at most. The king nodded in agreement. Lord Brandon is right. Sir Ethan, you will depart with 5 knights of your choosing. We expect your return in 2 weeks with a full report. As you wish, your majesty. Ethan bowed his head, accepting the mission because he had no choice, but inside his mind was racing. Brandon had orchestrated this perfectly, using a real threat for his own purposes. As the meeting dispersed, Ethan saw Brandon approach Olivia with the familiarity of one who already considered himself her future husband. She didn't flinch when he took her hand and kissed it formally, but Ethan saw how her fingers twitched involuntarily. "Princess," Brandon said loud enough for others to hear, "with Sir Ethan away, I will take the liberty of increasing your personal protection. These are uncertain times." "That is very kind of you, my lord," Olivia replied, with the mechanical politeness she had perfected over the years. Ethan forced himself to walk away before his expression could betray what he was feeling, but it did not go unnoticed how Brandon watched him leave, that cruel smile still playing on his lips. That night, as he prepared his gear for the journey, Ethan was interrupted by a soft knock on his door. He opened it to find Thomas, the youngest squire in the castle, a nervous look on his thin face. "Sir Ethan, Princess Olivia would like a word with you. In the private gardens in an hour." Ethan hesitated. Meeting Olivia in secret on the eve of his departure was far too risky, but the urgency in the young man's eyes convinced him. "Tell the princess I will be there." An hour later, he stood in the walled garden behind the royal quarters, where roses and jasmine created a fragrant labyrinth of privacy. The crescent moon provided just enough light to distinguish shapes and shadows. Olivia appeared, wrapped in a dark cloak, almost invisible until she drew near. When the moonlight hit her face, Ethan saw that she was pale, almost translucent. "You shouldn't have come," he said quietly. "And you shouldn't be leaving," she retorted, stopping a few feet from him. "Ethan, this is a trap. You know that, don't you?" "I know." The admission came more easily than he'd expected, "but I cannot refuse a direct order from the king." "You can if you're dead," she whispered, and the desperation in her voice made him instinctively take a step forward. "Olivia." "No, listen." She held up her hands, as if wanting to touch him, but not daring to. "Brandon isn't just trying to get rid of you. Last night, I overheard a conversation between him and my father. He wants to move our wedding forward. He's using your absence to argue that the kingdom needs immediate stability." Her words hit Ethan like a series of punches. "When?" 10 days from now. A week before your planned return." Ethan clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. The diabolical genius of Brandon's plan was now fully revealed. Not only would he be away during the crucial period, but he would return to find Olivia married and forever out of reach. "There's more," Olivia continued, her voice trembling. "Brandon told my father he has evidence of improper behavior between us, that you harbor inappropriate feelings for me." The world seemed to sway beneath Ethan's feet. "What evidence?" "I don't know. Maybe someone saw us in the woods earlier today, or maybe it's just a lie. With Brandon, it's hard to tell." Tears glistened in her eyes. "Ethan, if you leave tomorrow, by the time you return, it will be too late. For everything." They stared at each in silence, the weight of all they couldn't say hanging between them like a physical barrier. Ethan knew she was right. He also knew he had no choice but to leave. "So be it," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "Perhaps it's for the best." "How can you say that?" Olivia's voice rose dangerously. "Because you deserve more than you can have with me. Brandon can give you a kingdom, riches, power. I can only offer love," she finished for him, stepping forward. "You can offer me love." The words hung between them, heavy with everything they had held back for years. For a moment, Ethan let himself imagine how different things would be if he were a lord of some land, if he had enough gold to compete with Brandon, if the world wasn't so cruel to those who dared to love above their station. But reality quickly set in. He was just a landless knight, and she was a princess destined to strengthen political alliances. "Love doesn't pay for armies," he said bitterly. "It doesn't build bridges or feed the people in times of famine." "Perhaps not," Olivia whispered, moving closer, "but it makes life worth living." For one terrible, wonderful instant, Ethan thought of taking her in his arms, of running away with her that very night, of abandoning everything for a chance at happiness. But then he remembered his oath, his honor, everything he believed about duty and loyalty. "I have to go," he said, stepping back. "Ethan, please, take care of yourself, Olivia, and be happy." He turned away quickly before his resolve could waver. Behind him, he heard a muffled sob that pierced his heart like a dagger. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He stood at the window of his quarters, looking out at the garden where he had left her, wondering if he was making the right decision or if he was just a coward disguised as an honorable man. The fine morning rain had turned the roads into treacherous mud. Ethan rode at the head of his small group, his hood pulled up against the drizzle that ran down the metal of his armor. 5 knights accompanied him. Sir Marcus, a 40-year-old veteran with scars that told stories of past battles. Sir Roland and Sir Geoffrey, competent young men but without real combat experience, and 2 common soldiers, Aldrich and Willem, hard men forged in the border campaigns. 3 days had passed since they left the castle, and with every mile Ethan felt the weight of the distance, like a chain dragging behind him. The image of Olivia in the garden haunted him, her pale face in the moonlight, the raw pain in her voice when she said his name for the last time. "Sir Ethan," Marcus approached, guiding his horse alongside his. "The men are asking about our specific destination. We know we're investigating caravan attacks, but we have no idea where to start looking," Ethan finished, recognizing the frustration in the veteran's voice. The truth was, Brandon had been deliberately vague about the mission's details. Reports of attacks on the eastern borders could mean anywhere along a stretch of territory that spanned dozens of miles. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack, or like getting rid of someone inconvenient for 2 full weeks. "We'll head to the village of Millhaven," Ethan decided. "It's the most important trading hub in the region. If there are problems with the route, someone there will know something." Marcus nodded, but Ethan saw the doubt in his eyes. The veteran knight was loyal and competent, but he was no fool. He probably also suspected this mission was more political than military. They rode in relative silence, only the sound of hooves in the mud and the occasional clink of metal against metal breaking the monotony of the journey. Ethan tried to focus on the landscape around him, on the rolling hills covered in vegetation that was beginning to turn yellow with the approach of autumn, but his thoughts invariably returned to the castle. How many days until the early wedding? 7? 6? With every passing hour, Brandon consolidated his position, whispering sweet lies into the king's ear, convincing everyone that the immediate union was not only desirable, but necessary for the kingdom's stability. And Olivia, would she be resisting, trying to delay the inevitable? Or had she already resigned herself to her fate, burying her true feelings under layers of filial duty? "Riders ahead," Roland's voice pulled him from his dark thoughts. Ethan looked up and saw 3 mounted figures emerging from a side trail. Even from a distance, it was clear they were not ordinary travelers. Their horses were well kept, their gear was organized, and they moved with the coordination of trained soldiers. "Sir Marcus Aldrich with me," Ethan ordered, drawing his sword as a precaution. "The rest of you stay back." The 3 riders approached in a defensive formation. When they were a few dozen yards away, the leader of the group raised a hand in a gesture of peace and removed his helmet. Ethan recognized the face immediately. Captain Garrett Webb, a mercenary officer who occasionally provided services to the crown. A man of ambiguous reputation, competent, but not necessarily trustworthy. "Sir Ethan," Garrett greeted him with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "What a coincidence to find you here." "Captain Webb," Ethan replied, keeping his sword drawn. "What brings you to these parts?" "The same thing as you, I imagine. Trouble with bandits attacking caravans." Garrett made a vague gesture toward the main road. "Lord Brandon hired my services for a preliminary investigation." Something cold settled in Ethan's stomach. Brandon had sent mercenaries on the same mission? It made no sense unless— "I see," he said carefully. "And what have you discovered so far?" Garrett exchanged a meaningful look with his companions. "Actually, Sir Ethan, I have specific orders to escort you back to the castle. There are urgent developments that require your immediate presence." Garrett's words echoed like a death sentence. Ethan knew with absolute certainty that there were no urgent developments. There was only Brandon, eliminating the last obstacle to his plans. "What kind of developments?" Marcus asked, suspicion clear in his voice. "Sensitive information I can't discuss out here," Garrett replied smoothly, "but I can assure you it is of the utmost importance to the princess's safety." The mention of Olivia made Ethan's blood boil. "Is the princess in danger?" "Potentially." Garrett moved closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a deadly secret. "There are suspicions that the caravan attacks are a diversion. The real target may be the castle itself." It was a well-crafted lie, Ethan had to admit, vague enough to be impossible to disprove, but specific enough to justify an urgent change of plans. And why didn't Lord Brandon send an official messenger? Ethan questioned. Because we can't be sure the routes are secure, Garrett answered promptly. Messengers can be intercepted. It was safer to send an armed party to escort you personally. More lies, but technically plausible. Brandon had thought of everything. If Ethan refused to return, it would look like he was putting his personal pride above Olivia's safety. If he returned, he would arrive at the castle exactly when Brandon wanted him to, perhaps even in time to watch the wedding as a final form of torture. Sir Ethan, Marcus murmured quietly, moving closer. Something isn't right. Why wouldn't they send a royal contingent if the situation is so grave? Ethan knew the veteran was right, but he also knew his options were limited. He could try to resist, but Garrett had 3 men, and there was no guarantee a fight would end in his favor. Besides, if there was even a chance of a real threat to Olivia. Very well, he said finally. We will return to the castle immediately. Garrett smiled, and this time, the satisfaction in his eyes was unmistakable. A wise decision, Sir Ethan. Lord Brandon will be very pleased. As the group reorganized for the journey back, Ethan felt as if he were riding straight to his own execution. With every step they took toward the castle, he could almost hear the echo of the bells that would announce Olivia's marriage to Brandon. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained overcast, perfectly mirroring the grim mood that had settled over the entire party. Marcus rode beside him, occasionally casting worried glances in his direction, but Ethan kept his face impassive. In the back of his mind, a small but persistent voice whispered that maybe there was still time, that maybe, if they rode fast enough, he could still reach the castle before it was too late. But a more realistic part of his brain knew the truth. Brandon had made no miscalculations. He would return to find Olivia lost forever, and his only choice would be to watch the wreckage of his own happiness, with what little dignity a defeated knight had left. The sun was beginning to set when Garrett announced they would make camp for the night. We'll leave before dawn, he said. We'll be at the castle before noon tomorrow. Tomorrow. The word resonated in Ethan's mind, like the tolling of a funeral bell. Tomorrow he would discover exactly what price he would pay for being born on the wrong side of the lines that divided the world between those who took what they wanted and those who only dreamed of having it. The castle towers appeared on the horizon, like accusing fingers pointing at the leaden morning sky. Ethan felt his chest tighten at the sight of the familiar walls, knowing he was returning not as the knight who had left 4 days earlier, but as a man marching to witness the destruction of his own soul. The party passed through the main gate in tense silence. Guards greeted them with respectful nods. Servants moved aside to let them pass, but Ethan noticed something different in the air, a palpable excitement, as if the entire castle were vibrating with some imminent event. His worst fears were confirmed when he saw the decorations. Garlands of fresh flowers adorned the columns of the main courtyard. Banners with the royal crest fluttered in the morning breeze, alongside others he recognized as belonging to the Hale family. In every corner, servants rushed about with fine fabrics, ornate candles, and other preparations that could only mean one thing. The wedding was set for today. Impressive, Marcus muttered beside him, taking in the elaborate decor. They must have worked all night to prepare all this. Ethan didn't answer. His throat felt as if it had closed up completely, as if an invisible hand were squeezing it. Brandon hadn't just moved the wedding up. He had chosen to hold it on the very day of his forced return. The cruelty of the maneuver was almost artistic in its precision. "Sir Ethan!" The young voice of Thomas, the squire, cut through the air as the boy ran toward the group. "Thank God you've made it in time. Lord Brandon was worried you wouldn't be able to return for the ceremony." "What ceremony?" Ethan asked, feigning ignorance though he knew exactly what it was. "The wedding, sir. Princess Olivia and Lord Brandon will be joined in matrimony at noon." Thomas radiated genuine excitement, obviously oblivious to the personal tragedy his words represented. "The whole kingdom is celebrating." Noon. Ethan looked at the sun, calculating that just over 2 hours remained. 2 hours to watch the woman he loved give herself to another man, sealing her fate with vows that would make her forever inaccessible. "Where are their majesties?" he asked, forcing a tone of professional courtesy. "In the Great Hall, sir. There's a special council meeting before the ceremony." Thomas lowered his voice conspiratorially. "They say it's about urgent security matters." Of course. The meeting Garrett had mentioned as a pretext for his return. Brandon was closing all the loops, ensuring every detail of his victory was perfect. "Sir Marcus," Ethan addressed the veteran, "arrange quarters for the men and see to the horses. I must present myself to the king." "Sir," Marcus hesitated, "would you like me to accompany you?" Ethan shook his head. What he was about to face was something he had to endure alone. The walk to the great hall had never seemed so long. Each step echoed against the stones, like a countdown to his own execution. Guards posted at the doors greeted him with reverence, but Ethan barely noticed them. His mind was elsewhere, desperately trying to find some way out, some way to alter the course of events unfolding around him. The hall doors swung open with a heavy groan, and Ethan entered to find the exact scene he had anticipated. The king occupied his throne, looking older and more tired than when Ethan had left. The councillors were lined up in their usual places, their grave faces masking any real emotion, and there, at the centre of everyone's attention, was Brandon. Lord Brandon Hale presented himself as the personification of triumphant nobility. His clothes were of the finest dark blue velvet, embroidered with gold thread that caught the light from the high windows. A heavy gold chain rested on his chest, and rings studded with precious stones adorned his fingers. He radiated power, wealth, and confidence, everything Ethan did not possess. "Ah, Sir Ethan," the king straightened upon seeing him. "Captain Webb informed us you would be returning today. Perfect timing." "Your Majesty?" Ethan bowed formally, struggling to keep his voice steady. "I came as quickly as I could upon receiving news of a possible threat." Yes, the king waved vaguely. "Lord Brandon informed us of his concerns. Very prudent of you to investigate the situation personally." Ethan looked directly at Brandon, who returned his gaze with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was the smile of a man who had won so completely that he could afford to be magnanimous to the loser. "And what did you discover about these attacks?" Brandon asked, leaning forward slightly as if genuinely interested in the answer. "Unfortunately, my investigation was cut short," Ethan replied carefully. "Captain Webb informed me of a threat to the castle that required my immediate presence." "Saw that?" Brandon waved it away dismissively. "Fortunately, my own investigations revealed the fears were unfounded. There is no direct threat to the castle, just excessive precautions on my part, I'm afraid." The ease with which Brandon dismantled his own lie was almost impressive. Ethan noticed several councillors exchanging confused glances, obviously trying to understand why a knight had been urgently recalled to deal with a threat that apparently didn't exist. "But let's not speak of military matters today." The king intervened with a voice that carried the weariness of someone who preferred to avoid unnecessary complexities. "Today is a day of celebration. Sir Ethan, you have arrived in time to witness the union of my daughter with Lord Brandon." "It is a great honor, Your Majesty," Ethan managed to say, each word costing him a monumental effort. "I'm sure the princess will be glad to see you've returned safely," Brandon commented, and there was something in the way he said "princess" that made Ethan's fists clench involuntarily. At that moment, the hall doors opened again, and Olivia entered. The air left Ethan's lungs as if he'd been punched in the gut. She was stunning in a white silk gown that flowed around her body like liquid water, the fabric catching and reflecting every ray of light that came through the windows. Her golden hair was arranged in an elaborate braid, interwoven with tiny pearls, and a veil as fine as morning mist rested on her shoulders. But it was her eyes that broke Ethan's heart. Red from recent tears, they met his across the hall for one devastating moment before quickly looking away. In that instant, he saw all the agony she had tried to hide, all the despair of a woman marching to her own doom. "My dear," the king extended a hand to her, "Sir Ethan has returned in time for our celebration." Olivia approached with measured steps, each movement a display of perfectly rehearsed royal composure. "Sir Ethan," she greeted with a shallow curtsy. "Welcome back, Your Highness," he replied, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. Brandon stepped forward and took Olivia's hand possessively. "My bride was concerned for your safety, Sir Ethan." "Isn't that so, my love?" The word bride cut Ethan like a blade, but it was my love that nearly broke him. He saw Olivia flinch almost imperceptibly at Brandon's touch, saw how her fingers tensed as if she wanted to pull away. "I was concerned for all our knights in the field," she answered diplomatically. "Naturally," Brandon smiled, kissing her hand with a theatrical display of devotion. "Your compassion is one of the many qualities that make our union so auspicious." The king rose from his throne with a creak of old joints. "Well, I believe we should prepare for the ceremony. Sir Ethan, will you join us in the celebration?" Ethan knew it was less an invitation than an order. To refuse would be an insult to the royal family, and a confirmation of Brandon's suspicions about his inappropriate feelings. "It would be an honor, Your Majesty," he lied. "Excellent." The king clapped his hands once. "Then we shall meet in the chapel in an hour. Lord Brandon, perhaps you'd like to use this time to prepare properly." "Certainly, Your Majesty." Brandon bowed, but before leaving he cast one last look at Ethan. For a moment, the mask of courtesy slipped, and Ethan saw the cruel triumph in the other man's eyes. It was the look of a predator, savoring the agony of its prey before the final strike. When the hall emptied, Ethan remained alone for a few moments, trying to gather the strength for what was to come. In 1 hour, he would watch the woman he loved speak vows of eternal fidelity to another man. In 1 hour, any hope of happiness he might have harbored would be buried forever. But there was something he needed to do first, something that might be his last chance to say what needed to be said, even if it changed absolutely nothing. Ethan found Olivia in the private gardens where they had said goodbye 4 nights before. She stood by the same rosebush, still wearing the magnificent wedding gown, but now she looked like a ghostly figure against the vivid green of the plants. Her hands trembled slightly as she caressed a white rose, and he noticed her cheeks were wet with silent tears. "Olivia," he called softly. She turned quickly, her eyes wide with surprise and something that looked like desperate hope. "Ethan, you shouldn't be here. If anyone sees us—" "I don't care," he interrupted, approaching slowly. "I need to talk to you before I marry Brandon," she completed, her voice raw as if the words physically hurt her. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the inevitable hanging between them like a suffocating fog. Ethan struggled to find the right words, knowing this might be his last chance to be completely honest with her. "I love you," he said finally, the words coming out like a confession torn from him by force. "I have always loved you. Since we were children running through these trees, since the first day you smiled at me. And I know this doesn't change anything. I know I can't offer what Brandon can, but I need you to know." Olivia closed her eyes, as if his words were a physical pain. "Ethan, stop, please." "I can't stop," he continued, taking another step toward her. "I'm going to watch you marry another man in less than an hour. I'm going to have to smile and pretend my heart isn't being torn apart. But before that, you need to know that there is someone in this world who loves you for who you are, not for what you represent." "You think I don't know?" She opened her eyes abruptly, and he saw all her pent-up anguish burning there. "You think I don't know that you're the only person in this damned castle who looks at me and sees Olivia, not her Royal Highness? You think I don't know you're the only person who makes me feel alive?" Her words struck him like lightning. For years he had wondered, hoped, feared knowing the truth about her feelings. "Then why?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I have no choice." Olivia's voice rose dangerously, and she struggled to control it. "Because I am a princess and princesses don't marry for love. Because my father needs Brandon's soldiers, his gold, his trade connections. Because if I refuse this marriage, innocent people could die when other kingdoms see our weakness as an opportunity." Every word was like a stab wound, but Ethan forced himself to listen. He needed to understand, even if understanding destroyed him. "And because," she continued, her voice now just a broken whisper, "Brandon told me that if I don't marry him willingly, he will find a way to make you pay for your inappropriate feelings. He has witnesses willing to swear you've dishonored me, Ethan. Witnesses who will say anything he wants for enough gold." The world seemed to tilt beneath Ethan's feet. "He's blackmailing you. He's protecting me," Olivia corrected bitterly. "In his own twisted way, he's protecting both of us. If I marry him without resistance, you remain an honorable knight. If I refuse, I'll run," Ethan said without hesitation. "I'll take my horse and disappear. Brandon can't accuse me of anything if I'm not here to be accused." Olivia shook her head violently. "And prove my guilt by doing so? No, Ethan, I can't let you destroy everything you've worked for." "Everything I've worked for?" He laughed humorlessly. "Olivia, without you, none of it matters. Titles, honors, oaths. It's all empty if it means I have to stand here and watch you be miserable for the rest of your life." "So what are you suggesting?" she asked, and there was something dangerous in her voice, something that sounded like desperate hope. Ethan stopped, realizing he had reached the point of no return. What was he suggesting? That she run away with him? That she abandon her duty, her family, her kingdom? That she become a fugitive for love? The idea was both tempting and terrifying. He could picture it, the two of them riding away, finding some place where they could just be Ethan and Olivia again, where titles and bloodlines didn't matter. But he could also picture the consequences, hunters sent after them, eternal disgrace, the life of fugitives that would await them. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "I just know I can't stand the thought of you being unhappy." "And you think I'd be happy as a fugitive?" Olivia asked softly. "Always looking over my shoulder, Always knowing our escape brought dishonor to my family, chaos to the kingdom? She was right, and he knew it. Even if they fled, the guilt would eventually destroy any happiness they might find together. So there's no way out, he said, more to himself than to her. There's no way out, she confirmed, moving toward him until they were only an arm's length apart. But there is one thing I can give you. One thing Brandon can never take from me. What? Olivia raised her hands and gently touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw as if trying to memorize every detail. This, she whispered, and rose on her tiptoes to kiss him. The kiss was soft at first, almost hesitant, but then it deepened with all the pent-up passion of years of repressed feelings. Ethan wrapped his arms around her, pulling her closer, savoring the sweetness of her lips, the scent of her hands, the feeling of finally touching the woman he had loved for so long. For one eternal moment, nothing existed but the two of them. There was no castle, no Brandon, no duties or consequences. There was only the taste of her lips, the sound of their ragged breaths, the sensation of being whole for the first time in his life. When they broke apart, they were both trembling. Olivia rested her forehead against his, and he felt her tears on his cheeks. Now Brandon can have my body, my obedience, my children, she whispered. But my first kiss, my first love, my heart, that will always be yours. Olivia, promise me something, she interrupted, pulling back slightly to look him in the eyes. Promise you won't watch the ceremony. I can't say those vows knowing you're there, knowing you're hurting. Please. Ethan wanted to protest, to say he would stay, that he would support her even in the worst of it. But he saw the desperate plea in her eyes and knew he couldn't deny her this one thing. I promise, he said, and promise me you'll find a way to be happy. Maybe not now, maybe not soon, but eventually. Promise me you won't let this tragedy define the rest of your life. That promise was harder. Ethan couldn't imagine a future without her, couldn't conceive of any form of happiness that didn't include her. I'll try, was the most he could offer. She smiled through her tears, a sad but genuine smile he would carry with him for the rest of his life. That's enough. In the distance, the castle bells began to chime, marking the time that was running out. Olivia slowly stepped away from him, smoothing her dress and trying to recompose her royal appearance. I have to go, she said. They'll be looking for me. Olivia, he called as she started to walk away. Yes? If there's any way, I'll be waiting. She didn't answer, but the look she gave him said everything. Then she hurried away, almost running back to the castle, leaving him alone in the garden with the scent of roses and the taste of her lips still burning in his memory. Ethan stood there until he heard the bells announce the start of the ceremony. Then, keeping his promise, he slipped out of the castle through a back gate, mounted his horse and rode away, taking with him only the clothes on his back and a shattered heart. Behind him, the bells continued to toll, celebrating a union that was destroying two souls while pretending to create happiness. 2 years had passed since Ethan last left the castle, 2 years since he had heard the bells celebrating Olivia's wedding, 2 years since he had sworn to himself he would find a way to live without her. Now, standing on the bank of a cold stream in the northern borderlands, he knew some promises were impossible to keep. The reflection staring back at him from the water was that of a changed man. His beard had grown in, partially hiding a fresh scar that cut across his face from temple to jaw, a gift from a particularly skilled bandit with a dagger. His shoulders had broadened with constant work, and his hands were calloused from holding a weapon every day. But it was his eyes that showed the deepest change. Where youthful hope had once been, now only a grim determination remained. He had found purpose, if not happiness, serving as a hedge knight in the wildlands. There was no glory in it, just the harsh satisfaction of protecting helpless villagers, of facing down the bandits and mercenaries who terrorized the isolated communities. It was dirty, dangerous, and poorly paid work, but it gave him something that service at court never had, the absolute certainty that he was on the right side. Sir Ethan, a young voice called, pulling him from his thoughts. He turned to see Gareth, a 17-year-old boy who had joined him a few months prior, approaching with a scroll in his hand. A message has arrived. Ethan frowned. Few people knew where to find him, and messages usually meant trouble. From whom? From the castle, sir, Gareth replied, holding out the sealed parchment. The messenger said it was urgent. The royal seal made Ethan's stomach clench. For 2 years he had carefully avoided any news from the kingdom, any information that might include mentions of Olivia or her new life as Brandon's wife. The arrival of this message felt like a violation of his hard-won peace. He broke the seal with fingers that trembled imperceptibly and unfolded the parchment. The handwriting was familiar. Sir Marcus, the veteran who had remained at the castle. "Ethan," the letter began without formality, "I need you to return immediately. The situation here has deteriorated beyond all expectation. The king is dead. Olivia, Queen Olivia is in mortal danger. Brandon has taken complete control and is eliminating any opposition. 3 knights have already been executed on false charges of treason. He is consolidating power for something terrible. I trust only you for this. Come quickly, or it may be too late. Marcus." Ethan read the letter 3 times before the words fully sank in. The king was dead. Olivia was now queen, but a queen under the control of a man who was proving to be far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. "Bad news?" Gareth asked, noticing the sudden pallor on his mentor's face. "The worst possible," Ethan muttered, carefully folding the letter. His mind was already working, calculating distances, considering options. 3 days of hard riding would get him back to the castle. 3 days to decide if he was willing to return to the place that had nearly destroyed him. But Olivia was in danger. The decision made itself. "Gareth, prepare my horse. We leave immediately." "Where to, sir?" Ethan looked south, where he knew the castle awaited him like a ghost from his past. "Home," he said, and the word sounded strange on his lips after so long. The journey back was a torture of memories and anticipation. With every mile he covered, Ethan felt the past closing in around him like a trap. He tried to prepare himself to see her again, but how does one prepare to face the only person who could destroy you with a single glance? During the cold nights under the stars, he wondered if she had changed, if life as a queen consort had hardened her, if the years under Brandon's control had erased the sweet girl he had known. Worse, he wondered if she had found a way to love her husband, if time and proximity had turned resignation into genuine affection. The thought was more painful than any physical wound he had ever suffered. When he finally spotted the familiar towers on the horizon of the 3rd day, Ethan paused for a moment to compose himself. The castle looked different somehow, darker, more menacing. Black banners fluttered where vibrant colors had once been, and even from a distance, he could feel an atmosphere of oppression hanging over the walls. He had sent Gareth back, insisting this was a mission he had to face alone. Now, approaching the gates he hadn't seen in 2 years, he questioned whether he had made a terrible mistake. "Halt!" A guard he didn't recognize held up a hand as Ethan approached. "Identify yourself." "Sir Ethan Blackwood," he replied, keeping his voice steady. "Sworn knight of the realm." The guard studied him with suspicious eyes. "Sir Ethan has been in exile for 2 years. Do you have any proof of identity?" Exiled. So Brandon had formalized his absence, turning his voluntary departure into an official banishment. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. "Sir Marcus sent me a message," Ethan said, producing the letter. "There is an urgent situation that requires my presence." The guard examined the letter carefully before nodding to his companion. "Keep him under escort until Sir Marcus confirms his identity." Ethan nodded, understanding the precaution. If Brandon was truly eliminating opposition, paranoia had become a necessity for survival. The castle courtyard was unrecognizable. Where there had once been cheerful activity and lively conversation, a tense silence now reigned. Servants moved quickly, heads down, avoiding eye contact. Soldiers patrolled in groups, their faces grim and alert. That's when he saw her. Olivia was emerging from one of the side towers, accompanied by 2 ladies in waiting and flanked by armed guards. Even from a distance, Ethan could see she had changed. Her posture was stiffer, more formal. She wore black mourning clothes that made her skin look almost translucent, but it was her eyes that shocked him, devoid of all the life he remembered, as if some essential light had been extinguished. For a moment their gazes met across the courtyard. Ethan saw recognition flare in her eyes, followed by something that looked like pure terror. She stopped abruptly, one hand flying to her chest as if she was struggling to breathe. Then Brandon appeared. Lord Brandon Hale had transformed in the 2 years since Ethan had last seen him. The man who emerged from the shadows of the main tower was a more sinister version of the noble he remembered. His clothes were darker, more elaborate, and he wore a lesser crown that declared his new position as king consort. But it was the way he moved that struck Ethan most, like a predator that had finally conquered its territory and now patrolled its borders with absolute confidence. Brandon noticed the direction of Olivia's gaze and followed it to Ethan. For a moment, genuine surprise crossed his features before being replaced by an icy smile. "Sir Ethan Blackwood," Brandon called out, his voice echoing across the courtyard. What an unexpected surprise. Ethan forced himself to maintain eye contact, every instinct screaming danger. "Lord Brandon, or should I say, Your Majesty?" "King Brandon will suffice," Brandon replied, approaching with measured steps. "I trust you received our message about the changed situation here in the kingdom." Our message? So it wasn't Marcus who had sent the letter. It had been a trap, and Ethan had walked right into it. "I received an urgent message," Ethan said carefully, "about threats to the safety of the Queen." "Ah, yes." Brandon's smile widened, and there was something genuinely malevolent in his expression. "There are indeed very serious threats to my wife's safety. In fact, Sir Ethan, you've arrived at the perfect time to help us deal with them." Ethan felt his blood run cold. Around the courtyard he noticed more guards had materialized, forming a discreet but unmistakable circle around him. This wasn't a return, it was a capture. And at the center of it all, Olivia watched with growing horror, finally understanding that the man she had once loved had returned not to save her, but to become another one of Brandon's victims. The cell in the castle dungeons was cold, damp, and familiar. Ethan had spent a night there years ago when he was young and reckless for publicly questioning a superior officer's decision. Now, 2 decades later, the environment hadn't changed. The same moss-covered stones, the same rotting straw on the floor, the same acrid smell of human despair. But this time, he knew he might not get out alive. The guards had been brutally efficient. They had disarmed him in the courtyard, shackled his hands and dragged him underground, while Brandon watched with evident satisfaction. Throughout the ordeal, Ethan had kept his eyes locked on Olivia, trying to communicate with his gaze that he didn't regret coming, that seeing her suffer had been worth the attempt to help. Now, sitting in the darkness with only a single flickering torch for light, he tried to understand Brandon's real game. Why devise such a complex trap? Why not simply eliminate him on the borders, where no one would ask questions? The answer came with the sound of footsteps echoing down the stone corridors. Brandon descended into the dungeons like a king visiting his domain, flanked by 2 personal guards. His elaborate clothes contrasted grotesquely with the sordid environment, and his smile was that of a man savoring a long-planned triumph. "Sir Ethan," he greeted, stopping before the iron bars. "I trust you're comfortable." "What do you want, Brandon?" Ethan asked directly, refusing to play the other man's games of courtesy. "Straight to the point. I've always appreciated that about you." Brandon gestured for the guards to step back slightly, creating an illusion of privacy. "I want you to confess." "Confess to what?" "Your crimes, of course. Treason against the crown, conspiracy against the king, attempting to seduce the queen, breaking your knightly vows." Brandon listed each charge as if reciting a shopping list. "The list is quite extensive, actually." Ethan let out a bitter laugh. "And what would be the purpose of a false confession?" "False?" Brandon tilted his head theatrically. "Sir Ethan, you returned to the kingdom after 2 years of unauthorized exile. You had secret meetings with the queen when she was still a princess. You abandoned your post on the day of our wedding. The facts speak for themselves." Brandon's ability to twist the truth was almost artistic. Each statement was technically factual, but painted a completely different picture of reality. "And what happens after I confess?" Ethan asked. "You will be executed as a traitor," Brandon replied, with the casualness of someone discussing the weather. "Publicly, of course. The people need to see that justice is served. And if I refuse," Brandon's smile widened, "then you will be tortured until you confess and then executed. But not just you, Sir Ethan. I need you to understand that your stubbornness will have consequences for others." Ethan's blood ran cold. "What others?" "Sir Marcus, for a start. After all, it was he who supposedly sent the message that brought you back. Clearly, he was conspiring with you." Brandon paused, savoring the effect of his words. "There are also a few servants who may have facilitated your secret meetings with my wife. And of course there is the Queen herself. Olivia did nothing, didn't she?" Brandon arched an eyebrow. "A man does not return from a voluntary exile without motivation, Sir Ethan. And what motivation could be more powerful than a woman, especially a woman who reciprocated your inappropriate feelings?" Ethan felt the trap closing around him with surgical precision. Brandon didn't just want to eliminate him, he wanted to use his death to justify a complete purge of any potential opposition. "You're bluffing," Ethan said, but his voice sounded less convinced than he intended. "Am I?" Brandon moved closer to the bars, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Do you want to know how I obtained proof of your secret meetings with Olivia, a very observant gardener who noticed you in the rose garden on the eve of my wedding? For a small sum of gold, he is willing to testify that he witnessed more than innocent conversation. The revelation hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. They had been watched during that last desperate meeting, during the kiss that had been both a farewell and a confession. Of course, I might be willing to reinterpret his testimony, Brandon continued smoothly. Perhaps he only saw a touching conversation between old friends. Perhaps there was nothing inappropriate after all. It all depends on how cooperative you choose to be. Ethan finally understood the diabolical genius of Brandon's plan. It wasn't just about eliminating him. It was about forcing him to destroy his own reputation, to confess to crimes he never committed, ensuring that even in death he could not be seen as a martyr or a hero. "Why?" Ethan asked. "Why all this elaboration? You already have everything you want." "Do I?" Brandon stepped back, and for the first time, Ethan saw something beyond cruel confidence in his eyes. "I have the throne, it's true. I have power, wealth, the forced respect of the nobles. But there is one thing I have never been able to have, Sir Ethan. One thing that eats at me every single day." "What?" "My wife's love." The words came out laden with a toxic bitterness. "For 2 years I have tried to win her over. I was gentle when she needed gentleness, firm when she needed structure. I gave her everything a queen could desire. And yet, every night I see her looking out the window as if she's waiting for someone to appear. And we both know who that someone is, don't we?" Brandon's naked confession was both pathetic and terrifying. This wasn't just a cruel man consolidating power. It was an obsessed man systematically destroying any barrier between himself and the object of his obsession. "So you see why your death must be complete," Brandon continued, his mask of control back in place. "Not just physical, but moral. Olivia needs to see you as the man who nearly destroyed her honor, who brought disgrace upon her and everyone she loves. Only then will she finally understand that there is no salvation coming from anywhere, that I am her only reality. She will never believe your lies. Won't she? Not when Sir Marcus confesses to conspiring with you. Not when the servants admit to facilitating your illicit meetings. Not when you yourself, before the entire kingdom, confirm every accusation I make against you." Brandon moved away from the bars, gesturing for the guards to approach. "You have until noon tomorrow to decide, Sir Ethan. Confess voluntarily and allow your death to be swift and your accomplices to be spared, or force me to extract the confession in a much more unpleasant way for everyone involved." "Wait," Ethan called as Brandon started to leave. "Yes? Can I see her? Just once, before I decide?" Brandon considered the request for a long moment, and Ethan saw complex calculations flashing in his eyes. "For a brief conversation," Brandon finally agreed. "Under strict supervision, of course. Perhaps it's exactly what you both need to understand that certain fantasies must remain in the past." When Brandon and the guards left, leaving Ethan alone again in the darkness, he allowed himself to consider for the first time that perhaps there was a third option. Something that Brandon, in his arrogance, had not considered. Something that could save Olivia, even if it cost him everything else. The torch continued to flicker, casting dancing shadows on the cell walls, as Ethan began to formulate a plan that was both desperate and perhaps the only real hope he had left. Olivia entered the cell escorted by 4 guards, as if she were a prisoner in her own castle. The iron chains on Ethan's wrists clinked as he stood to greet her, and she flinched at the sound. A cruel reminder of how far they had both fallen. She was even paler in the dim torchlight, and Ethan noticed how her hands trembled slightly. The black morning gown made her look like a ghost of herself, but it was her eyes that disturbed him most, devoid of hope, as if something essential had died inside her. "Your Highness," he said formally, aware of the attentive ears around them. "Sir Ethan." Her voice was too controlled, as if each word were carefully weighed before being spoken. "I am sorry, deeply sorry that you have been brought to this. It is not your fault." He kept his tone equally formal, but tried to communicate with his eyes everything he couldn't say aloud. She understood. Through years of secret meetings and conversations heavy with subtext, they had developed a silent language that no observer could fully intercept. "My husband has informed me of the accusations," she continued, and Ethan saw how the word husband cost her a visible effort to pronounce. "For he says you will confess." "I am considering his proposal," Ethan replied carefully. "Don't." The word escaped her before she could stop it, laden with so much desperation that one of the guards shifted uneasily. "Your Highness," Ethan said softly, "sometimes the truth is less important than protecting the ones we love." She stared at him intently, and he saw the exact moment she understood what he was saying. He saw the horror grow in her eyes as she realized he was willing to sacrifice his own honor to save her life and the lives of others. "No," she whispered, "you can't. Your honor is all you have. My honor is not worth the lives of innocent people, but it will destroy you. Even in death you will be remembered as someone who loved enough to protect what mattered," he interrupted gently. Tears glistened in her eyes, and she fought to keep them in check in front of the guards. Ethan wished he could touch her, comfort her, but the chains and the presence of the observers made any gesture impossible. "There is something else," she said quietly, glancing quickly at the guards before turning her eyes back to him. "Something Brandon doesn't know I've discovered." Ethan waited, feeling the tension in the cell rise. "Sir Marcus is alive," she murmured, almost inaudibly. "He's hiding in the kitchens. Brandon believes he fled, but a few loyal servants are protecting him. If you confess, Brandon will stop looking for him." The news should have been a relief, but it only strengthened Ethan's resolve. If Marcus was alive and in hiding, there was hope that someone would survive to tell the truth eventually. "I understand," he said. "Ethan," she called, using his first name without a title for the first time in the guard's presence. The sound made them all straighten, recognizing the improper familiarity. "There is something I need to say, something I should have said years ago." "Your Highness," one of the guards intervened. "His Majesty said this conversation should be limited to—" "I am the Queen." Olivia turned to the guard with an authority Ethan had never seen in her before. "And I will speak to my subject as I see fit." The guard stepped back but remained on high alert. "Go on," Ethan encouraged. Olivia took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice carried a strength that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. "My greatest regret is not marrying Brandon. It's not losing my freedom or being forced into this life. My greatest regret is never having fought for what I wanted. It's having accepted that love was a luxury I couldn't afford, instead of recognizing it was the only thing that made everything else bearable." Her words echoed in the cell, both a confession and an absolution. "If I had been braver," she continued, "if I had found a way to fight, maybe you wouldn't be here now. Maybe we could have found a different path." "Olivia," Ethan said softly, forgetting the guards, the protocols, everything but the need to comfort her. "There was no different path. You did what you had to do. And I did what I had to do too. By coming back here, by putting yourself in danger for me, by trying to protect you, always trying to protect you." They stared at each other through the iron bars, and for a moment, the years melted away. They were just Ethan and Olivia again, two people who had found love in the wrong place at the wrong time, but who had never stopped caring for one another. "Your Highness," one of the guards intervened again, "His Majesty is waiting." Olivia nodded, but didn't move immediately. "Ethan," she said, "whatever you decide, know that I understand and that I forgive you." "There is nothing to forgive." "There is." She backed slowly toward the door. "There are my years of cowardice. There's a lifetime of what-ifs. There's the fact that my fear destroyed your chance at happiness. My happiness was never your responsibility, wasn't it?" She paused at the cell entrance, looking at him over her shoulder. "Then whose was it?" Before he could answer, she was gone, leaving only the echo of her footsteps in the stone corridors and the faint scent of jasmine that always followed her. Ethan sat back down on the damp straw, her words echoing in his mind. Whose happiness was his? All his life he had defined his joy in terms of what he could do for others. Protect the weak, serve the kingdom, love Olivia even from a distance. He had never considered that perhaps he had the right to fight for his own happiness too, but it was too late for such reflections now. In a few hours, the sun would rise, and he would have to give Brandon his final answer. He would confess to crimes he didn't commit to protect innocent people, destroy his own reputation, to save those he loved. It was, he realized, the only form of honor he had left. When the guards came for him the next morning, Ethan was ready. They had brought water for him to wash and clean clothes, the garments of a knight being led to public judgment. Even in his execution, Brandon wanted everything to appear proper and legal. The great hall had been prepared for the spectacle. Local nobles lined the sides, their faces a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Brandon occupied the royal throne, a lesser but significant crown on his head. Beside him, on the smaller queen's throne, Olivia sat as still as a marble statue. "Sir Ethan Blackwood," Brandon announced as the guards brought him to the center of the hall. "You stand before this court accused of multiple crimes against the crown. How do you plead?" Ethan looked around the hall, seeing faces he had known since youth, people who had served the kingdom loyally for decades. Then his eyes met Olivia's one last time. "Guilty," he said clearly. "Guilty of all charges." The hall echoed with shocked murmurs. Even those who had expected a confession seemed surprised by the speed and clarity of his admission. Brandon smiled triumphantly. "And you acknowledge that these actions were motivated by inappropriate feelings for the Queen?" Ethan hesitated for only a moment, seeing Olivia close her eyes as if she couldn't bear to hear his answer. "I do." "Very well." Brandon stood, savoring every moment of his triumph. "Sir Ethan Blackwood, for your crimes of treason, conspiracy, and breaking the sacred vows of knighthood, you are sentenced to death. The execution will be carried out at noon in the main courtyard, so that all may witness that justice has been done." As the guards led him back to his cell to await his execution, Ethan allowed himself one last look at Olivia. She had opened her eyes and was staring at him with an expression he would take with him to his death, not of accusation or contempt, but of deep understanding and painful gratitude. He had managed to protect her, even if the price was everything he valued about himself. It was, he decided, a price worth paying. End of story. If you've made it this far, you've experienced every emotion, every tear, and every racing heartbeat of Ethan and Olivia right along with me. This is a story about love that transcends social barriers, about sacrifice that defines who we truly are, and about the courage it takes to protect the ones we love, even when it means losing everything. But every great story deserves to be shared, discussed, and felt by other hearts. If this narrative touched you as much as it touched me writing it, don't keep that feeling to yourself. Leave a like, share in the comments which moment moved you the most, and subscribe to follow more stories that will make your heart race and your eyes water. After all, true love, even when it ends in tragedy, deserves to be celebrated. And who knows, maybe Ethan and Olivia's story has only just begun.